1. A couple years ago, my daughter, 11 at the time, was playing at a friend's house. I arrived at the house to pick her up, and the mother of the girls informed me they'd left to ride bikes and were due back an hour ago. I figured they'd lost track of time and usually would have just waited at the house for them to get back. But I had somewhere to be immediately afterwards, so hopped in my car to look for them. I know the usual areas where they were likely to head in the neighborhood. I got about 5 blocks from the friend's house and slammed on my brakes. I could have sworn I saw my daughter entering a strange house. I threw it in park right in the middle of the street, completely prepared to make a fool of myself running after someone else's child who happened to look like mine, but not willing to take any chances. Sure enough, it was my daughter, halfway over the threshold of some guy's house. In a brew of enraged panic, I yanked my daughter back and, breathless from sprinting over, kind of tripped over my words and asked some version of, "What the fuck is going on here?" My daughter explained that she had lost her phone while she was out riding bikes, and this guy had found it. She was going in to get it. I myself am a little too trusting, so in other circumstances, I might have eased up a little and apologized for coming in guns blazing. But something about this guy was off. He gave me the sort of feeling you get spotting a snake in the grass. I was seriously contemplating just leaving the phone and sprinting my child away from this guy as fast as I could move her. I told him he could bring it out to her, and there was no reason she needed to go in his house. He seemed kind of pissed off, but to be fair, I was being pretty brusque. I checked on where her friend had gone, and apparently her friend didn't want my daughter going over there. She was heading home to tell her mom where my daughter went. She didn't have a phone of her own, because she didn't want to go to his house. The guy brought her phone out and handed it to her without a word and shut the door, and he was gone. I felt like a real asshole after that, because he did have the phone, so I figured he was expecting to be thanked for returning it, but instead I jumped the shark and was hostile. Then I started asking my daughter what had happened, though, and it just didn't add up. She said she'd put the phone in her bag when they started biking. The girls stopped at a popular ponds sort of area to do some sketching. She was sure it was there when she set her bag down, because she remembered checking the time before putting it back in, and deliberately deciding to put it in her bag and not her pants because she had shallow pockets that day. I didn't doubt her. She's never been one to lose things. Always very careful, never even misplaced the charger before, let alone the phone. They left when they finished their drawings, and about halfway between there and home, a man flagged her down and said something like, "Hey guys, I saw you back at the creek. I think one of you might have dropped a cell phone," and described the phone case, and sure enough, it was her phone. He said he had it back at his house, and she followed him, thinking it would be rude to demand he bring it to her or to the friend's house. Her friend cautioned her against going, but he said something about how he was pretty busy, so if she didn't get it now, he wasn't sure when she'd be able to pick it up from him. Friends and even most family told me I'd never know his true motivations, and I was being way too cynical. But I was stone cold certain. After hearing about how he approached her, I drove right to the police station to file a report. But there wasn't really much to report. My daughter lost her phone, a stranger found it, and returned it. I had no way to prove that he stole it and used it to lure her inside. My describing it that way made me sound crazy even to myself as I stood in the station. They just told me to avoid the house if the guy made me uncomfortable, and that was that. I never let the incident go. I was always a little more cautious. And I never even let my daughter visit that friend again because I was so nervous about that section of town. I wasn't totally sure what had or had not happened that day, but I figured better safe than sorry. It was just a sense of insistent uneasiness. The man has recently been arrested for abducting a girl around the same age as my daughter was then, and torturing her, and killing her. I recognized him instantly. Authorities suspect he is connected to multiple other missing child cases in my region. I called back about my incident and spoke with the people involved, but the house he was in when my daughter encountered him was not his legal residence, so there was no way to prove it was the same man in a way that would be helpful or useful to the current circumstances. I'll be cheering on every step of the judicial process from the sidelines, and secretly relieved my daughter will not have to be involved. What was once a sense of uneasiness is now a constant boulder of terror, sitting on my chest, crushing in on me. I don't want her to as much as leave the house to play with older siblings in the yard. The anxiety is constant. The sense of impending doom is never ending. It is so different to suspect you've had a close brush with disaster than to know it. Than to see the face that was inches from your child's in the newspaper with such a bone-chilling headline. She doesn't remember much about that day, and I'd rather she not think about this, so I can't really discuss it at home. My friends have been supportive, but they have kids of their own, and I can tell it's unpleasant for them when I talk about this. No one wants to consider that something bad could happen to the most important thing in their world. I understand. So just writing it all out to people who can listen but be completely detached from the situation is cathartic. Hug your babies tight. Trust your gut. I don't know what else to say. 2. Please be aware the following story contains a depiction of a crime scene resulting from domestic violence. This happened to me and my wife a few months after we moved into a new place. This took place back in November of 2018, and actually wasn't even fully resolved until just recently. So, back at this point in time, me and my wife were going through some hard times. I was making money through some slightly illegal means and had actually gone to jail for 9 months. I got out in September of 2018 and had a job in the city waiting for me when I got home. Now, when I got out of jail, my wife was living with her mom about an hour away from the city. But she knew we had to find somewhere to live close to both of our jobs that were downtown, in the city we were moving to. Since we were starting all over after the legal fees, lawyers, fines, and other assorted debts, we knew we could only afford something super cheap that would let us pay week to week instead of having to pay security deposits and monthly rent up front. We found a boarding house in our city and checked it out. There were 4 rooms in the house with a shared kitchen and bathroom for everyone. We moved into one of the rooms. Our neighbors on the first floor was a 30-year-old Asian lady and her mom, and then upstairs there was a young black guy who moved in the same week as us, and also a young couple that lived in the room next to the young black guy. In the 3 months we lived there, the only people we talked to was the young couple upstairs. They seemed similar to us in age and interests, and we usually just talked to them in passing, or on the front porch when we were all out there having a cigarette. They were nice enough. They also smoked weed, which me and my wife did as well, and we smoked on the porch together a couple of times. Things were just A-OK until the month of November came, and shit just started to hit the fan left and right with this couple, who we'll name Jim and Sierra. It started off small. Things like hearing them get into short shouting matches, or one or both of them asking me and my wife to borrow money, or constantly trying to bum cigarettes. One day I came home and Sierra was walking into the house the same time as me, with 3 guys I've never seen before and a case of beer. They party all night and keep me and my wife up, but we end up going to bed around 5 a.m. A few days later, we are woken up on a Sunday, me and my wife's only day off, to Jim screaming at Sierra and throwing all of her stuff into the front yard. He was calling her a whore and a slut, and told her to get out of his life, yada yada yada. They argue for like 3 hours, and eventually someone picked Sierra up. We had a week of peace and quiet, but by the end of the week she was moved back in, and the fights and screaming were constant, until one night. It was a Tuesday night, the day before my birthday. Me and my wife worked that day, and just kind of lounged around after work. My wife and I ended up smoking some weed around 1 a.m., and put in a movie to giggle at all night. The whole time we were watching this movie, we would hear Jim and Sierra screaming at each other. We could hear the stomp of their feet as they moved around upstairs in the room right above our ceiling. It went on the whole movie, it seemed like. After actually making it through the movie without falling asleep from smoking too much, we both noticed that Jim and Sierra had finally stopped fighting. We both wanted to take advantage of the quiet and lay down and cuddled up to sleep until we had to go to work in the morning. I was woken up in the middle of the night by my wife, who was shaking me and looking off toward my side of the bed. I was so tired and out of it I thought maybe she saw a big bug and wanted me to kill it. I turn over to get up, and when I do, there is a man standing next to my bed, hunched over my nightstand, going through the drawer, and the man has an empty milk gallon in his hand. After rolling over and us locking eyes, he stood up from his hunched position and was just staring at me. I kicked my feet out onto the floor and sat up in the bed as he started backing up slowly, one step at a time. At this point, I finally realize that it's Jim in our room going through my stuff, holding an empty milk gallon. Now, like I said, I was still pretty out of it and just calmly said to him, "What's up, Jim? Why the hell are you in our room, bud?" After a few seconds, Jim asks, "Can I borrow your guy's car, man? Or can one of you take me down to the gas station and back real quick?" Thank goodness for my wife, who was finally fully awake, unlike me, who said, "What? You broke into our room to borrow our car? No, you can't borrow our car after you broke into our room at 4 a.m. Now get the fuck out of here, you fucking weirdo." Jim leaves, but he doesn't leave. He sprints out of the front door and starts running down the street towards the gas station he wanted to go to. I look at my wife, and before we can even say anything to each other, our neighbor from upstairs comes down and says that Jim and Sierra were fighting worse than he ever heard or saw, and that he hadn't heard any noise coming from the room for about an hour. My wife, who was feeling protective of a fellow female who had to endure this abuse, told me and our neighbor to go upstairs and check on her. We go up the stairs, and the door to Jim and Sierra's room is shut, but not locked. I knocked and shouted for someone, and there was no answer. Standing side by side, me and my neighbor turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. On the back wall of the room, Sierra was laying on the couch, face up, and we also noticed that the floor and ceiling had been hacked up like someone was trying to get inside of the floor and ceiling for some reason. Me and my neighbor walked over to the couch, thinking that Jim had knocked her unconscious. But when we made it to her, we realized there was blood on the couch and thin blood streaks on the wall and blood all over her. I can't speak for my neighbor, but as I looked at her, I thought, she doesn't have a face. The neighbor called the cops immediately, and I was just standing there dumbfounded. I heard him tell the police that Jim had smashed his girlfriend's face in with a sledgehammer, and the weapon was still there, but Jim had run off. The police told us to leave the room and wait outside if we felt safe doing so. The cops came and put an APB out on Jim, and they found him an hour later running down the street. After talking to the cops, they said it looked like Jim was trying to find the gas line in the house, and he probably wanted to go to the gas station to get fuel to help him burn the house down with Sierra inside. After all the cops left and everything calmed down, me and my wife looked at each other like, what the fuck? We had to call into work the next day because there were 2 news vans out front all morning, and every time we stepped out for a smoke, they were badgering us for an interview. It ended up being a small blip in the news with a short paragraph in the newspaper and a 1-minute segment on the local news channel. But yeah, that was how I was face to face with a murderer right after he killed his girlfriend in the same house we were in with him. Obviously, everyone in the house was asked by the prosecutor to come testify in court. By the time they asked me to come to court, it was 2 years later, and at that point in time, I was actually locked up for a probation violation. Keep in mind, I am in the same county jail that Jim is in while he's going to court. I had gone on vacation while on probation across the country, and they found out about it, so they gave me 60 days to do in county jail, and then I would be done with probation. It just so happened those 60 days were during the trial for Jim. The prosecutor let my wife bring nice clothes up to the jail, because it wouldn't look good for a criminal in jail stripes to take the stand and testify against this guy, and the prosecutor thought I was well-spoken enough that the jury wouldn't know any better. Now, the way this particular county does court is they basically round up everyone in the jail that has court that day, and take them all to a giant holding cell in the basement of the courthouse, and take you upstairs as your case comes up. I told officers taking me to the holding cell I was a witness in a murder case, and I didn't want to be put in the same room as the guy I had to testify against. They said that won't happen, and took me to the holding cell. I started thinking, Well, they probably have the serious murder-type cases in a different cell. When the cop called my name to go to court, I started walking to the entrance of the cell, and from behind, I hear someone say my name and tap my shoulder. I turn around, and of course it's Jim, 4 feet away from me, face to face. All he said after I turned around was, "Good luck today." And all I could do was reply, "You too," and get the hell out of there. After that, they put a special command in the system to keep us separated. 3. Let me share the story about the time my mother and I discovered a homeless man living in our cottage basement. This was in February this year, 2021. We have a cottage about 45 minutes away from my parents' main home. It's not too far from Huntsville in Muskoka, Ontario, if anyone wants a visual. Thing is, it's completely unfinished. The basement has no proper flooring and has a slight water leak right now, so there are plenty of fans and a dehumidifier running. As a result, one of us needs to check on the place at least once every 2 to 3 weeks to empty the dehumidifier in the basement and make sure everything is okay. To describe the house layout a bit, the entrance to the basement is directly in front of the main entrance. It's a long, skinny staircase down with a low roof, so you need to crouch on the way down. There is one crappy light bulb in the ceiling, so it's always super dark down there. There's one big room, then 2 hallways branching off. One hallway leads to a bedroom, and the other leads not only to a second bedroom, but also a washroom. All of which are completely unfinished and without lighting. The second hallway is much longer, and the rooms are just way off in the back corner of the basement and are completely dark. In other words, it's creepy looking. Okay, so let's get to the good part, the day it all went down. My mom and I are headed up there to empty the dehumidifier, have some lunch, and clean out some junk. We're slowly gutting the place. It had been nearly 3 weeks since we'd checked up on the place by this point. We stopped at a McDonald's beforehand and each got a fillet-of-fish combo. First time trying one, and it was actually pretty tasty. We get into the place and put our foot on the table, then turn the heat on. The first thing we do is run downstairs to turn the water on and check the dehumidifier. After turning on the water, we head over to the dehumidifier and notice that there's hardly any water in it. It looks like it's only been running for a couple of days. There is still the regular amount of moisture on the ground, but it was strangely empty. My mom and I head upstairs, and she grabs her phone to text my dad and asks if he's stopped by to empty the dehumidifier recently. He said he hadn't. We were both puzzled as to why it looked so empty, but never considered there was a third person in the house with us. After heating up our food, we both sit down at the table and turn on the TV. About 5 minutes into our meal, we hear a massive bang downstairs, almost as if someone stubbed their toe really badly on a cupboard or something like that. We instantly jump and look at one another with a freaked-out look on our faces. The TV is still playing rather quietly. Then we hear the worst thing. We hear a small grunt downstairs. It was unmistakably a human vocal sound. My mom whispers to me, "Was that a person?" And I smirk and nod my head yes, although it was freaky at the moment. I wasn't really taking it very seriously for some reason. Looking back, this was pretty serious, and this person could have been very dangerous. I just told her, "Grab your jacket and let's head out to the car and call the police." We gather our stuff, and I grab a kitchen knife on the way. If you'll recall, the entrance to the basement is directly across from the main entrance to the house. So I had to make this peek around the corner, and was fully expecting to see a person on the dark staircase. But luckily, it was just a series of stairs, down into the dark abyss. Once we're out front, we jump in my car and she calls the cops immediately. Within 3 minutes, 4 cruisers show up and 5 cops got out. We told them what had happened, and they headed down the driveway. They were in the house for probably 10 minutes before the door opened. A couple of cops walked out, and boom, the third cop brought out a short, chubby guy with long black hair and pop bottle glasses. They brought him out handcuffed onto the front steps, and another cop had a bag that looked like his belongings. We were in our car, which was up the street a bit and facing away from the entrance of the cottage, but my mom turned away as soon as he was brought up the driveway. She didn't want to get a good look at him. as the whole situation was pretty unsettling for her. They loaded him in the back of one of the cruisers and took him away. One cop came over and spoke with my mom for a bit about the situation. Ultimately, my parents had decided not to press charges against the guy when it was all said and done. He was just sleeping on the cold cement ground with a small roll-out mattress, even though there was a proper bed upstairs. This made us think that he'd been down that back hallway in the unfinished bedroom for a while. We probably walked downstairs to empty the dehumidifier and turn on and off the hot water a number of times, and he was like 15 feet away in one of the bedrooms. He probably wasn't a bad person, and I'm personally at least a bit thankful he had decided to empty the dehumidifier. Hopefully he lived in there for most of the colder months this past winter. We're just lucky it didn't turn into one of those crazy squatting situations. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 545. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Right, I think we have a birthday shout-out. Okay, I got this request yesterday, and it just so happened I hadn't made the video yet, so I'm able to pop this in. Although ideally, if you do want a birthday shout-out, or any kind of shout-out really, for any other reason, but a week before, send an email to my King of the Cities, my business address. That's usually the best way to get in contact with me. Any more than a week I'll probably forget, any less and it's not guaranteed I'll have time to do it. Well, hopefully one day I'll be successful enough to hire an assistant and they can take care of all that stuff for me. Okay, birthday shoutout, that's where we were. Okay, this shoutout goes to MPH, that's the name on YouTube, MPH. A very happy birthday to you, MPH. And, as requested, here's a little sing-song. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear MPH. Happy birthday to you. Righty. I always feel very mellow after I get done singing that. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap things up there for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.